There's a specific kind of feeling you get when you fall for someone for the very first time. Not a crush, not the butterflies you get when someone smiles at you in the hallway, but the real thing. The kind where you find yourself thinking about them when you're doing something completely unrelated, like washing dishes or staring out a bus window. That was her. That was us. We started dating when I was barely 20 and he was 19. We were young, but that didn't make any of it feel less real. If anything, it made it feel more urgent, more electric. He was funny and charming, and he had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. And at the time, that was everything I wanted. We did all the things you do in a new relationship, long phone calls that lasted until 3 a.m., inside jokes that only made sense to us, that milestone every couple weeks energy where each new month together feels like a small celebration. Here, 6 months in, I thought, okay, this is it. This is what people write songs about. I want you to hold on to that image for a second, because what I'm about to tell you is going to hurt a little. And I want you to understand that when it happened, I was completely blindsided. It was right around our 6-month anniversary when I found out the first thing. He had been talking to women online, sending money, receiving explicit content, not just browsing something passively. Like, he was actively engaging, paying for it, pursuing it. And this wasn't some ambiguous gray area. I had made it very clear from the early days of our relationship that pornography was a hard line for me, a deal breaker, not a preference I'd negotiate on, a deal breaker. And I know how some people might react to that. Some people think having that boundary is controlling or unrealistic. But here's the thing. I wasn't asking him to change who he was. I was asking him to respect something I communicated clearly and honestly before we ever got serious. That's not control. That's a relationship agreement, and he agreed to it. So finding out he had violated it, and not in a small moment of weakness kind of way, but in a deliberate, paid, ongoing kind of way, shattered something in me that I didn't know could break. I confronted him. And here's where it gets complicated, because he didn't just apologize and move on. He sat me down and opened up in a way I hadn't expected. He talked about hypersexuality, about a history of sexual trauma, about how being a survivor of sexual abuse can sometimes rewire the way your brain processes intimacy and desire. He was vulnerable in a way that felt real, that felt painful. And I, someone who had never been in a serious relationship before, didn't know how to hold his pain and my hurt at the same time without choosing to prioritize his. He promised me it was over. He said he'd work on it. He said he'd do better. And I believed him. Because when you love someone and they show you the rawest, most broken part of themselves, leaving feels like abandoning them in the dark. After that conversation, things shifted, or at least they seemed to. He was attentive. He was present. We had more conversations about boundaries, about what our relationship meant to each of us. I started to relax. So I started to let myself trust again, not fully, not right away, but incrementally. The way you do when you've been hurt, but you're choosing to believe in someone anyway. That's the thing about rebuilding trust. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's all these small moments of him showing up, of him choosing you again and again, that slowly start to fill in the cracks. And for a while, for several months, that seemed to be happening. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. I stopped essentially being on guard, which honestly is what you're supposed to do when you're healing a relationship. You can't stay in survival mode forever. You have to eventually open back up, or what's even the point? And that openness, that willingness to choose him again, is what made what happened next hurt so much more. I found out in December he had downloaded 3 different AI adult chatting apps. Had not just visited a website in passing, downloaded 3 separate apps, created accounts, and interacted with AI-generated characters in explicit ways. On one of them, he had paid for a premium subscription specifically to access full nude animations and interactive content. I want you to sit with that for a second, Because I know there's a debate online right now about whether AI-generated content counts as cheating or whether it's really in the same category as pornography. And I hear that debate. I understand why people have different opinions on it, but that debate is irrelevant to my situation. Because this wasn't about whether AI content is technically pornography. This was about a promise. This was about a man who looked at me, knowing what I had communicated, knowing what I had forgiven, knowing what I was trusting him with, and made a deliberate series of choices that violated that trust. Again, he didn't stumble across something, he sought it out. He downloaded 3 apps, he paid money, he spent time, and the things he said in those chats, what I saw when I found out, made me physically sick. I don't want to get into the specifics, but if you've ever read something you cannot unread, something that fundamentally changes the image you had of someone you loved, you know the feeling I'm talking about. We had been together for over a year and a half at this point, 18 months of me choosing him, and of me working through the first incident with grace and patience, of me believing that he was different, that we were different, that the vulnerability he showed me was real. And standing there in December, I felt like such a fool. I want to pause the story here because this is the part where I know some of you, maybe a lot of you, are thinking, why didn't she just leave? And I want to answer that question honestly, not defensively, because I've asked myself the same thing. The first reason is that this was my first serious relationship. I didn't have a blueprint. I didn't have a prior experience to hold this one up against and say, this is not how it's supposed to feel. Everything I knew about love, I was learning in real time inside this relationship. So when he hurt me and then showed me his vulnerability, I didn't have the context to recognize that cycle. I just felt it. The hurt and the hope all tangled together, and I responded the only way I knew how, which was with empathy. The second reason is that trauma and love get complicated when they're in the same room. When someone explains their destructive behavior through the lens of their own pain, when they say, I do this because I was hurt too, it activates something in caring, empathetic people, especially in young women who have been socialized to nurture, to heal, to stay. The impulse to help the person who is hurting you isn't weakness. It's actually a sign of deep capacity for compassion. But compassion without boundaries is just self-sacrifice. The third reason, and this is the one I think a lot of people in situations like mine need to hear, is that we often confuse the length of a relationship with the worth of a relationship. We think, I've put in a year and a half, I've forgiven so much, I've invested so much. If I leave now, what was it all for? But here's the truth. The amount of time you've spent in a relationship does not obligate you to spend more time in it. Staying out of sunk cost isn't loyalty, it's just pain with a longer timeline. Let's talk about what a pattern is, because I think that word gets thrown around a lot without people really engaging with what it means. A pattern isn't a single bad decision, it's not one mistake. A pattern is when someone demonstrates repeatedly and across different contexts that their behavior does not actually align with what they've promised you. A pattern means that the apology, however genuine it sounded in the moment, did not produce lasting change. A pattern means that despite knowing the consequences, despite witnessing the damage, despite making a promise, they still made the same choice again. What I experienced wasn't a stumble. It wasn't a relapse followed by genuine recovery. It was the same betrayal, repackaged in a new format. This time, digital. This time artificial, but no less intentional, no less a choice. And I think the part that's hardest to accept is this. His explanation about hypersexuality and trauma may be completely true. He may genuinely struggle. He may genuinely be suffering. Addiction and compulsive sexual behavior can absolutely be a form of addiction, is real, and it deserves compassion and professional support. But, and this is crucial, his struggle does not make your boundary less valid. His pain does not mean you are required to absorb the consequences of his behavior indefinitely. You can have enormous compassion for someone's wound and still recognize that being in a relationship with them is causing you harm. Both things can be true at the same time. Loving someone through their addiction is noble. Being the only thing standing between them and getting real help while absorbing the cost of their choices is not sustainable. It is not fair to you. And I wish someone had sat me down after the first incident and said this clearly. When someone breaks a stated deal breaker and then gives you an emotional explanation, that explanation deserves compassion. But it does not automatically deserve a second chance inside the relationship. Compassion can exist outside a relationship. Support can be offered at a distance. Healing does not require you to stay. And I also wish someone had told me that forgiving someone and trusting them again are two entirely different things. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, to let go of the poison of resentment. Trust is something that has to be earned, rebuilt slowly, and can only be genuinely extended when behavior actually changes. Forgiving someone doesn't mean you hand them back the exact same opportunity to hurt you in the exact same way. And I wish someone had said, your first relationship being this hard doesn't mean all relationships are this hard. Please don't let this be the standard you measure love against. Please don't walk away from this thinking that love requires you to keep forgiving the same betrayal on a loop. That's not love. That's just familiarity. Love, real love, does not ask you to set your stated limits on fire so someone else can be comfortable. Love is not supposed to make you feel disgusted, ashamed, sure, and foolish on a recurring basis. Love, at its core, should feel safe. So what do you do when you're in this situation? When you're a year and a half in, when you still have feelings, when the person has shown you both the best and the worst of themselves, and you genuinely don't know what the right move is? I'm not here to tell you exactly what to do, because only you can make that call. But I do think there are a few questions worth asking yourself honestly. First, has anything actually changed? Not in what he says, but in what he does. Is there evidence of genuine effort, therapy, accountability, transparency, or just apologies that reset the clock until the next incident? Second, if he did this a third time, would you leave? And if the answer is yes, if you know there's a line that would make you walk away, then ask yourself why that line exists in the future but not right now. What would the third time give you that the second time didn't? Third, what does your gut tell you when you're completely honest with yourself, in the quiet, at 2 a.m., before you've talked yourself out of it? Not what you hope is true, not what you wish you were capable of. What does your gut actually say? And finally, what would you tell a best friend if she came to you with this exact story? What would you say to her? Because I'll bet you'd be a lot kinder to her than you're being to yourself. And I'll bet your advice would be a lot clearer. Harn, before I wrap up, I need to say this directly to anyone who sees themselves in this story. You are not stupid. Staying after the first incident didn't make you stupid. Believing him didn't make you stupid. Loving someone through their pain and wanting it to work out, that doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. It makes you someone with a big heart who wanted to believe the best about someone you cared about. Being in your first relationship and not having all the tools to navigate it perfectly, that is not a character flaw. That is just being young and learning and doing your best with what you have. The only thing I'd push back on, gently, is the idea that staying is still the right call when the evidence keeps stacking up against change. Not because you owe it to yourself to leave. Not because some internet stranger is telling you what to do. But because you deserve a relationship where your boundaries are not a problem to be worked around, where you don't have to brace yourself for the next discovery, where you can actually exhale. You deserve that, not someday, now. And if he is genuinely struggling, if the hypersexuality and the trauma are real things he's dealing with, then he deserves real help too. The kind that comes from a professional. The kind that doesn't put the burden of his healing on your back. You being there is not fixing him. A relationship is not a rehabilitation program, and you cannot want his healing more than he wants it himself. I don't know what you'll decide. Maybe you're already at the end of your rope, and hearing this is just confirmation of what you've known for weeks. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle, still hoping, still grieving, still trying to figure out what love is supposed to cost. Whatever you decide, whether you stay and set new, firm conditions on, or whether you finally give yourself permission to go, know this: the fact that you're asking these questions means you already know, somewhere inside you, that something is wrong. You are not overthinking this. You are not being dramatic. You are not crazy for feeling what you feel. Your boundaries matter. Your hurt is valid. Your history, however short, is real. And the love you gave in this relationship, no matter how it ends, was not wasted. It was yours to give. That's not nothing. So that's actually everything. You're 20 years old. You've handled something incredibly painful with more grace than most people twice your age would have, and you are going to be okay. I'm rooting for you, whatever comes next.